Hello. Today I'll be talking about Star Trek Fleet Captains. This game came out, I think, 2011, and I played it. That's around the same time I got it. I played it several times back then, but then I hadn't played it since about 2012, so about 10 years ago. But I am over Labor Day weekend. I've got some friends coming over, and me and one of my friends are going to play this. So I had to pull it out and relearn the rules, which isn't that easy. But since I was doing that, I figured I'd go ahead and make a video on it. So here we go. So I'm going to get started with how to set up. All right, first thing you'll do is take your location tiles, shuffle them up, and then you can make your map pretty much any way you want to, but there is a standard configuration for the basic standard 10-point game that's suggested in the rules. So that's the map that I'm going to create. So we do that in this fashion. Start by placing one tile in the middle between the two players. Then you place two tiles, or they're not really tiles, they're kind of flimsy little cards, but place two above and two below. Then you'll lay out six map cards or tiles on either side of your initial row of five. And then you'll put another row of five on either side of that, so you end up having a 5 by 5, 5 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way around. Then on one side of the map here, you'll put your Federation command post, and on the other side of the map, you'll put your Klingon command post. Next, you'll take these two deck console cards. They're a little thicker than the map tiles. Put them on one side of the map. Get rid of some filth if you have some on your board. Alright. You'll see these have space for encounter cards, your leftover location cards that you didn't use when you're building your map. They'll go there. And this one has space for your science mission cards, your influence mission cards, and your combat mission cards. So, next you'll take your mission decks and shuffle them. You'll separate them into three decks, your influence. The backs all look the same for all the mission cards, but the fronts can be separated into influence missions, combat missions, and science missions. So you'll shuffle these three decks separately. Then you'll put your science missions face down next to this side of the mission deck console. You'll put your influence missions here and your combat missions here. Next you'll take your encounter deck, shuffle that, and place that next to this other console. Again, on one side your leftover locations from creating your map go here. Your encounter deck goes on this side here. And then up here, whenever you're directed to trash a card, it will go here. Next, each side will take their ship deck. So this is the Federation ship deck and the Klingon ship deck. Each side will shuffle their own deck, and then they will draft their starting fleet. So as I mentioned, we're playing the standard game, a 10-point game, so your fleet size will be 10 points. Again, you can play a larger size if you want to, but the rules say for at least your first game and for the standard game it's 10 points. So what you'll do is turn over the top card after you've shuffled your deck and see what ship you got. That's a size 4. So you put that over next to your command post. So now that's 4, so that's a fleet size of 10. So I draw again. Now I got a 3. So now I'm at 7 points. Draw again. Now this one is 6, so that would put me over the size of 10, so I just ignore that and draw another one. I got a size 1, so that puts me at 8 points. Draw again, and that puts me at 10 points. So those are the ships that I'll be using. Any ships left over, you just take those and put them somewhere next to your command console. You will use those later when you're doing a reinforce action. And for the Klingon side, I got size 5, a 4, and a size 1, so that's my 10. Now, if you were doing your fleet draft or fleet muster, as it's called, and as you were going through, say you got a 5 and a 4, and then you kept getting like a 2, a 3, a 1, and you never get where you equal the size 10 exactly, you can either just keep the fleet cards that you have taken already, even though you're not quite at the size of 10, or you can shuffle all the cards back up into the ship deck again and do another muster and do another draft to try to get 10. Usually it works out where you can get the right size. Next, you'll find the ship models that actually go along with your ship. So, you know, they'll say the name of it, like the Reliant. You'll see down there it says Reliant. And, of course, pay no attention to the paint job on these ships because some of them are not good. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So for the ships that the Federation drafted, these are their 4 ships, and for the 3 ships that the Klingon player got, these are his ships. Now you'll want to go ahead, these are clicks bases, so you can turn this dial to set the settings for the different, this is your shields over here, the bottom one is your engines, the middle one is your sensors, and the top one is your weapons. And I can't see the little weapons icon on this one. I think I've got this model in the way. Hold on. Well, you just can't see it very good on these Klingon ships, but at the very top there's a little icon that looks like this for weapons. So anyway, the settings you can set on these dials correspond to the settings that are on these cards. So this is what your weapons are set at, what your sensors are set at, what your engines are set at, and what your shields are set at. And anyway, you turn this dial and you can set your ship to one of those settings. Now you'll notice that there's a white section, yellow section, and a red section. So that's for normal. Once you take damage, then you're down in the yellow alert section and you have to turn your dial. There's actually a yellow section that you turn into that matches these settings. And then finally a red alert section. If you take 2 damage, then you would turn your dial until it turns into the red section and set to one of those settings. And if you take another damage once you're in the red alert status, or 3 damage, then your ship is destroyed. So anyway, you'll get your 3 ship models that match the cards that you drew. Set their initial setting from the standard choices and place them on your command post in the fleet deployment zone. Next, you'll build your command deck. You'll see each side has 10 subdecks. The Federation side has the Captain Kirk deck, main engineering deck, heavy security deck, flagship fleet deck, strange new worlds deck, evasive maneuvers deck, sensor upgrade deck, Captain Picard deck, Starfleet Command deck, and Wild Space deck. The Klingons have the House of Martok deck, the Klingon High Council deck, the Imperial Expansion deck, the Code of Honor deck, the Science of War deck, the Way of the Warrior deck, the House of Duras deck, the Battleship deck, Hidden Enemy deck, and the House of Moog deck. Now, each of these decks for both the Federation and the Klingons, each deck holds 10 cards, and you're going to choose 4 decks to be your command deck for the game. And to choose those, you're supposed to look at what kind of missions you're going to get. If you look at the ships you chose, you'll see this ship you're going to draw 1 combat mission. This ship you're going to draw 3 influence missions and 1 combat mission. And with this ship, you're going to draw 2 influence missions and 3 combat missions. So if you're playing a 10-point game, that should add up to 10 different missions. So you'll look at what kind of missions you're going to get. And then knowing that, you'll choose what 4 decks that you want to use for your command deck for the game. Now, I have not played this enough that I know what deck works better for influence or with science, or you would think the Way of the Warrior deck or the Battleship deck would be better if you have more combat cards, but now you could look through them and see it looks like House of Moog has a lot of combat. Anyway, you'll choose 4 decks that you think will go best with the types of missions you're going to get. Each side will do that. So, for example, we'll say the Klingon player is going to take the Battleship deck, House of Moog deck, House of Duras deck, and the Science of War deck. So that should be a total of 40 cards in his command deck. Then you'll shuffle that deck and place it here next to your command post where it says command deck. So let me get that shuffled up, and then I'll do the same thing and pick 4 decks for the Federation command player. Alright, so I've got the Klingon shuffled command deck there, and the Federation shuffled command deck there. The other command cards that weren't part of the 4 decks that you chose, they're just not used for this game. Then draw 4 cards from your command deck to be your starting hand. And then those will just be in your hand. Of course, for me playing solo, I'm just going to leave them laying down here. Next, you'll go ahead and draw the mission cards that your ships require. So I need 2 science for this ship, no influence, no combat. So you come over here to your mission and you draw 1, 2 science. Then this one needs 1 science. So again, get another science. Then this one needs 1 influence and 2 combat. So we know the influence are here and the combats are over here. So 1, 2. And then this one required 1 science, 1 influence, and 2 combat. So 1 science, 1 influence, 2 combat. So that should be 10 cards that form your mission deck. So you'll get all those, shuffle that deck, and then place that next to your command post where it says mission deck. Alright, then after you've drawn your mission cards and put them face down next where it says mission deck, you'll go ahead and draw your first 3 missions and put them down here where it shows the mission cards go. So you can see I drew 2 influence and a combat for the Klingons. And similarly, for the Federation player, I drew 2 influence missions and a combat mission. And these, if it says secret mission, you're supposed to put it face down so the other player doesn't see it. Since I'm playing solo, I'll just go ahead and leave it face up. But it kind of tells you what you need to do to get the victory points there. So build 1 colony to get a victory point. Control 8 adjacent locations to get 2 victory points. or destroy one enemy ship in combat to get 1 victory point. Now that's all the rules state that you need to do to get ready to play, but there are some tokens. Each player should take their 3 action tokens, so the Federation takes those 3 action tokens. The Klingon player takes those 3 action tokens. There are dice. The game comes with these 2 tiny little dice, which I don't really like, so I'm just going to use these bigger ones. And then there's a variety of other tokens that you need to sort and put near the board, and we'll talk about what those are for when we're going over the rules. But after that, we should be all set up and ready to play. So let's start with how to play. Alright, so the object of the game, if you're playing a 10-point game, again, you can decide how many points you want to play to, but the standard game, like I said, is 10 points. You're trying to gain 10 victory points. And, I showed when I was showing missions, your main way to gain victory points is to complete missions, 1 for this one, 2 for this one, 1 for this one. You can also gain victory points from some encounters that you'll have when you explore locations, which we'll talk about here in a minute. You can also gain victory points if you destroy an enemy ship, you get a victory point. And there's some other ways, but the main ways are your missions. So to play the game, you randomly determine whichever method you want to use, a first player. And we'll just say, in this instance, that the Federation is going to be the first player. So one of the things you can do on your turn is to move each of your ships 1 time. You don't have to move them all. You can move 1 of them, 2 of them, none of them. It's up to you. But one of the things you can do on your turn is to move your ship. So let's talk about moving. So a ship's movement allowance is determined by what you have its engine set to on your clicks dial. Let's see if I can get this. So for this one, the Reliance engines, which is the bottom number there, are set to 5. So it can move up to 5, and we'll see how that works in a minute. But you can always move into an adjacent space for 1 movement point. Now when you move into a tile that is unexplored like this, when you move into it, you'll be exploring it. So for instance, if the Reliant wanted to move into this space, you would flip the tile over, move your ship in there, and then you look here, and it's got an encounter, and it'll either have a single number like this, or it'll have a range of numbers like 1 to 3. So you have to roll 1 die, and in this case, if you roll a 1, then you have to have an encounter. If it had something like said 1 to 3, then if you got a 1 through 3, then you have to have an encounter. But we'll talk about encounters a little bit more. You also can look here and see if there's any text that affects this space. This one's just looks like a little informational. The NX-01 Enterprise was the first ship to observe a hypergiant star at close range. So there's nothing that really affects the space. It does tell you what kind of space it is. It's a hypergiant star, and it says there again, star hypergiant. But down here you see the size of this space, which is a big one, 9. So if you wanted to cross this space and go into another space, your engines would have to be set to higher than 9, because it costs 9 movement just to cross this space. Now again, it just costs 1 to move into it, but if I wanted to continue on, I would have to have at least 9 to cross this, and then 1 more to move into this one. So my engines would have to be set to at least 10, and currently they're only set to 5, so I would have to stop. Now also, if I had rolled, let's just say we did roll for that encounter like you're supposed to when you explore a new space. So I got to get a die roll. Of course I didn't get a 1, but if I did get a 1 and I had to do the encounter, then whenever you have to do an encounter, when you roll it and you have to do the encounter, then you have to stop. Even if I had enough engines, and my engines were set high enough where I could cross this space and move into another space. If you have to have an encounter, then you must stop. And I guess this is a good time to talk about encounters. So if I had rolled a 1 and had to have an encounter, you draw the top card from the encounter deck and read what it says. This one is not very good. It's the Tribbles card. The rapidly reproducing furry Tribbles have taken over your ship. Place this encounter card on your ship as cargo. So for the Reliant, you'd have to find the Reliant's card and flip that under there, and this would be cargo that the Reliant has. And then and disable 2 systems of your choice. So for instance, because it's got to have 2 disabled systems, maybe you want to disable your shield, so you'd have to put a disabled shields, well, that's a sensors, disabled shields token, and maybe a disabled weapons token. So that would show, even though you have your click setting not showing those systems as disabled, these tokens on your card would show that they are disabled. So disable 2 systems of your choice. As long as your ship has tribbles, 2 systems must always be disabled, but you can change them each time you make a power adjustment, which we'll talk about power adjustment later. The only way to be rid of the tribbles is to use a transporter action to move cargo between ships. And we'll talk about transport actions later also. But anyway, this is kind of a negative card. Some of these encounter cards are positive. They do good things for you. And it just varies. We'll look at one other one, and just see how it is. Dilithium recrystallization. You're able to recrystallize the depleted dilithium on your starship, giving your engines more power. Place a permanent +1 engines token on one of your ships in this location. So if you got that one, then you'd take one of these +1 engines tokens, and you always have your engine setting +1 more than what it's set to on the clicks dial. So those are kind of various encounters you can have if you have to draw an encounter card. Now, once a location is explored, like this one is, the next time a ship moves into this location, they don't have to roll for an encounter. That space will not ever have to roll for an encounter again. It's only when you move into an unexplored location tile that you must roll for an encounter. You have to roll for one, but you may not always have one if you don't roll whatever the numbers are in the encounter section. So let's just look a little more about movement. Say the Reliant was starting its turn here, and it had its engines set. Oops. Its engines set to 5, like we showed. If it was starting its turn here, it could move into this space for 1, but again, it would have to stop because its engines are not set high enough to cross this 6 space. But if, for example, they were starting here and they wanted to move here, well, they could cross this tile because that's a size 4 and their engines are set to 5. So that would cost 4 movement to cross that, and then 1 movement to move into this. So they would be able to move from this space to this space with their engines set at 5. So I mentioned you have to stop moving if you have an encounter. You also can't start moving your ship, then decide to go move another ship, and then come back and finish moving ship you'd started moving before. Or if you start moving your ship and then stop to make a power adjustment, then you have to just stay stopped. If you start moving your ship and stop to take an action with that ship, then you just have to stay stopped. So pretty much when you start moving a ship, you have to move it to however far you can move it or want to move it, and then it can't move any again. But again, you can move all of your ships one time on your turn. And just to say one more time, you can always move to an adjacent location for 1 movement point. If you try to move further than that, you have to be able to pay have enough movement points to cross the size of that tile and move into the next one, and at least 1 point to move into the next one. If your ship happens to start its movement in the same space as an enemy ship, you can't just move. You have to try to make a breakaway roll to get away from the enemy ship. So what you do is roll 1 die and add the size of your ship. So in this instance, the Reliant is a size 2, and then they would roll 1 die, and so that would give them an 8. Then the opposing ship, which this one is the Kahndaq, so it's a size 1, so it would roll, that player would roll a die and get a 2, so that would be 3 against 8, so you could go ahead and move without any other issue. But if your total was less than what the opponent rolled plus their size, then you can still move, go ahead and continue to move, but the opponent gets 1 free attack on you. And if you even if you lose the roll and the size comparison, and you decide not to move, the enemy still gets to make a free attack on you. We'll talk about attack later, but that's called a breakaway. And again, just to reiterate, so if your size plus your die roll is equal to or greater than his size plus his die roll, then you can just move on. If it's less than, then he gets to make a free attack on you, and you can still go ahead and move. If, for example, your ship started here and you wanted to move here, you didn't start in the same space as this player, but you wanted to move through the space he's in. When you move in there, you have to then make something similar to a breakaway roll, but it's called an evasion roll because you're just moving through. And that works the same way as the breakaway roll, your size plus a roll of the dice. And if that's if you're equal to or greater than his roll, then you can go ahead and continue moving. If you are less than his size and his roll, then you have to stop moving in that space. But he does not get to make a free attack on you. The only penalty for an evasion roll is that you have to stop. If you start with more than 1 ship in the same space, you can declare that you're forming a task force and name which ships are going to be in that task force, and then they can move together, but they have to complete their movement together, so they have to start and end in the same spot. They can't move and split up and go different directions. But in this case, if there was an enemy ship in the same space, and you say you're forming a task force, you want to move out of that space, and you say you're forming a task force with these 2 ships, then for your breakaway roll, you add the size of both ships plus 1 die roll against, the size of his ship plus 1 die roll. And then the same thing applies. If you're equal to or greater, you get to move on out. If you are less than his roll, then he gets to make a free attack against 1 ship. So he will decide which of the ships he wants to attack, and then he gets to make that free attack. And the same would work for the evasion roll if you formed a task force with these 2 ships. Oh, and I didn't mention, if you form a task force, your engine value is set to whatever the lower of the 2 ships has their engine set to. So if he had his set to 5 and his were set to 4, then your movement allowance would be 4 points. Not 5 that you're set to. But if you say your engines were set higher and you knew you could move to this space, similarly as the previous evasion roll, when you move in here, if you formed a task force, you'd have to make an evasion roll, but again, you'd get to add the size of both your ships and against the size of just his 1 ship. and then it works the same. You'd roll one die but add the size of both your ships. And anyway, the same, but you add the size of both your ships. And if you form a task force and move into an unexplored location, and you have to have an encounter, then if the counter has some effect against a ship, you decide which ship that effect goes on, unless the encounter said it affects all ships in this location, and then of course it would affect any ships that were in your task force that moved in there. And I think that pretty much covers movement for the most part. So another thing you can do on your turn with each of your ships at any time is make one power adjustment with each of your ships. So if you moved somewhere and had to have an encounter, you drew an encounter card that said you had to make some kind of sensor test and you had your sensor set kind of low, you could go ahead and pick up your ship and make your one power adjustment for that turn, and maybe turn your clicks to where your sensors are set to a higher level, and then go ahead and do the test on the encounter, which we haven't talked about system tests yet, but we will here shortly. Or if you knew you were going to move, you wanted to move across a space that required your engines to be set higher, you could go ahead before you moved and pick up your ship and adjust your power, your engines to a higher level, and then make your movement. Now you can't, in the middle of your movement, you can't start moving, then make your power adjustment, and then continue moving. If you, I think I mentioned earlier, if you stop moving to make a power adjustment, then you have to quit moving at that point. You have to stop movement. But pretty much any time on your turn, each of your ships can make one power adjustment. And that's just turning the dial on your clicks to set it to one of the settings in the current level that it's in. So either in the normal level, or if you're damaged, in the yellow alert level, or if you're damaged more heavily, then you can make an adjustment in your red level. So you can always make a power adjustment in the same level that your ship currently, alert level that your ship is currently at. So let's take a minute to talk about system tests, since I had mentioned that kind of thing. Let's say your ship had moved in here, and you'll see that it says in this nebula, any ship that ends its turn in this location. So if you moved in here and stayed in here and ended your turn, any ship that ends its turn in this location must succeed at a level 10 sensor test or take 1 damage. So when you're going to make a system test, in this case against sensors, if you haven't made a power adjustment previously, you could make a power adjustment to adjust your sensors to the highest level that they can, and or whatever you want to do. In this case, his sensors are set to 11 at this point. Up there, the D means his weapons are disabled. If you ever have to make a test against a system that's disabled, you just automatically fail it. So if I had to make some kind of weapons system test because my weapons are set to disabled up there, I would just automatically fail that. But in this case, I have to make a level 10 sensor test. Since my sensors are set to 11, I would just automatically pass. But let's say, for example, I had previously already made a power adjustment, so I can't make another one, and my sensors are now set to 7. So when you make a system test, you take whatever level your system that you're testing is currently set to, in this case 7, then you get to play one card from your hand if you have one that can affect that system. So currently the Federation player doesn't have a card that will affect his sensors, but you may have a card that has an ops, or well, it would have to have an ops effect. We'll talk more about cards in a little bit, but if you had one that had an ops effect that gave you like +2 to sensors. You could play that card. It would get discarded. You could play it, discard it, and get +2 to your sensors. But then you also get to roll 1 die. So you add your system total plus your die roll, plus if you happen to have a card or any tokens on your ships that were giving you benefits to your sensors, then you would get to add those also. And if you succeed, then you pass the test. If you're equal to or greater, you pass the test. If you're less than, then you take whatever negative effect it says. Now, I mentioned when you're doing a system test, you get to add your system level, and then you have the opportunity to play a card. Your opponent may have a card that could possibly affect you for your test. If they do, they can play one card also, but that's pretty rare that they would have a card that affects you during your system test. But if they do, they have the opportunity to also play a card to try to hinder you. And then you get to roll your die and, of course, add any other benefits that you already have from tokens giving you bonuses to your sensors or whatever system you're testing. It could be shields, could be weapons, could be engines, could be sensors. So location tiles may make you do a system test, or you might have an encounter that makes you do some kind of system test. When you get in combat, that's a special kind of system test, which we'll talk about when we get to combat. So another thing you can do on your turn, I've mentioned you can move all your ships once on your turn. I mentioned you can make a power adjustment with each of your ships once per turn. Another thing you can do on your turn is take 3 actions. But each ship can only take 1 action, usually. Now you may have a card that allows a ship to take a second action, but mostly each ship can only take 1 action, and you're only allowed 3 actions per turn in the standard 10-point game. I think that varies if you're playing a larger point game, that you could have some more actions. But in the standard 10-point game, you get 3 actions and only one action per ship. So in this case, I've got 4 ships. Every turn, one of my ships is not going to get to take an action because I can only take 3 actions. So what are the possible actions? Well, one action you can take is a scan action. So say the Reliant here had moved on his turn. Now he wanted to take an action. He wanted to do a scan action. Well, when you do a scan action, one of the things you can scan is an unexplored location. So that player can secretly flip over that tile, look at it, see what it is, then flip it back down, and then they put one of their scan tokens on it to show that they scanned it. But that's an action, so then the Reliant would have to take this action token, put it on its card to show that it's taken the 1 action that it can take this turn. Another type of action you could take is an influence action. So say the Reliant is here and they wanted to take an influence action. Now there's 2 types of influence action. There's an exert influence, and then there's build or expand an installation. But those are both types of influence action. So the first one, exert influence, is the easiest. If you exert influence in a location, then you just take one of your control tokens and place it down in that location. And then you've done an exert influence action, so of course then you'd have to take your action token, put it on your ship, and that's the only action you can take that turn. Now, if you were in a space that already had some enemy control tokens, you can do an exert influence action to remove one of their tokens. You can never put one of your tokens as long as there are enemy control tokens there. So if you wanted to end up putting one of your control tokens in this space, you would first have to take an exert influence action on one turn with this ship to remove this control token, and then either move another ship in there and let them spend their action to do another exert influence, or on a future turn you could just stay there and do your next action to exert influence and remove their other control token. Then the next time, either you on your next turn or another ship moves in there that hasn't taken an action, that they could do an exert influence action, and then they could place a control token. Well, what good are control tokens in a location? Well, for one, you might have a mission like this one that the Federation currently has, where if they control 8 adjacent locations, they complete this mission and get 2 victory points. And you control a location even if you have just one control token in there. So remember, only one side can ever have a control token in there at one time. So even if you just have one control token in there, you control it. So for instance, that mission, if you controlled 8 adjacent locations, you would complete that and get 2 victory points. So that's one reason you want to have control tokens. The other reason is the other type of influence action I mentioned, which was the build or expand installations. So if the Reliant was in this space and there was a control token there, they could, for their action, do a influence action and build an installation. Now you can normally only build installations on habitable planets. You'll see this one says habitable planet. Or if some effect has placed an installation on some other location tile that isn't a habitable planet, then you can also expand, possibly expand that installation if you have control of that location. But, for instance, in this example, if the Reliant wanted to build an installation, they have one control token there. Now I will mention this one in particular says that this location require one additional control token to build. So normally at a habitable planet, if you have one control token there, then you can take an action to build an installation, and you can build an outpost if there's just one control token there. Now here, because this one says this location requires one additional control token, you wouldn't be able to build this outpost. You would have to first take a influence action to exert influence and place a second control token there, and then another ship on this turn could move in and use their action to build an outpost, or you on your turn, or on your next turn, could that's a colony, sorry. You could build an outpost for your influence action. So we'll just kind of ignore this little effect right here for now. So normally, if you have one control token, you can build a colony. If you then place another control token there, you can upgrade you can build an outpost. If you then have another control token there for an action, you can upgrade the outpost to a colony, which then has a shield value. The outpost has no shield value, so it can just be destroyed if somebody attacks it. The colony has a shield value of 15. If you then in the future end up using a influence action to place a third control token there, somebody could then use another action to upgrade the colony to a star base, which has a shields of 30. Now, what are the benefits of these? Well, an outpost and a colony let you repair your ship there. So if you had taken damage somewhere, you could move to where you have an outpost or a colony, and for your action, that turn, you could take a repair action. And for a repair action, if you were in the red alert section, you could move your self into a setting in the yellow alert section for one repair action, or if you were in the yellow alert section, you could then move back up into the white section. Or if you had a token that was like disabling your engines for your repair action, instead of moving up to a higher alert level, you could just remove the disabled engine token. Now, I didn't mention this, but you can only do a repair action, which is obvious, at a friendly outpost or colony. If this section was controlled by the Klingons, then of course that's an enemy installation, and you obviously couldn't do a repair there. Or if an enemy ship is, even if it's your friendly location to you, if there's an enemy ship there, you can't do a repair action. And of course, you can also repair at a starbase. In fact, at a starbase, you get an additional benefit where you can do a repair, as I mentioned, to move up to the next higher level in alert status, so from red to yellow or yellow to normal white. Or if you have a disabled system, you can take that token off instead for one repair action. But if you're at a starbase, you can possibly make two repairs by using your movement to make a repair. So instead of moving that turn, you could forfeit your movement to do one repair, and then you could take a repair action and do another repair. So at a starbase, you have the possibility to do two possible repairs. And I didn't mention this, but you could also do the same thing. You can always move to your command post. If you're over here, you can move to your command post. Well, or if you have enough movement to move into it. And when your ship's at your command post, you can also do a repair action there, and you get the benefit like you do from the starbase, where you can forfeit your movement to do another repair. And I didn't mention, but it costs 0 to move. If you're here, it costs 0 movement to move to your command post, though you can't move to your command post or move at all if your engines are disabled. Now, one thing about installations, if you've left it and an enemy ships come over there and they end up taking actions to remove your control tokens, and then they end up placing a control token there, then whatever installation is there is then friendly to them and not to you, if you're the one that actually built it. Now, of course, these ones with shields, they can be attacked by either side. So if you were worried that you were going to lose control of an installation, you could attack it and destroy it. Of course, you'd have to do a level 30 weapons test against their shields if you're attacking a starbase, so that would be pretty tough to beat unless you had multiple ships there. But of course, an outpost has shields of 0, so if you attack it with weapons of 1 or better, you would of course destroy it. So anyway, I'm just saying your installations can be taken over if the enemy ends up taking your control tokens out by exerting influence and placing their own, or they could just attack one of your installations, and if they successfully do an attack against their shield value, which that's all going to come in when we talk about combat here shortly, but they could destroy an installation, or you could destroy your own installation. One other thing I didn't mention, if you do end up building a star base, then that's worth 1 victory point, so you would take one of these victory point tokens and place that in your victory point pile. Alright, another type of action that your ship can take is a transport action. So you can use a transport action to transfer cargo or crew between ships, or to beam an away team down to a planet, or retrieve an away team. You may remember earlier we had this Tribbles card that got put on a ship as a cargo, and it said the way to get rid of the Tribbles is to use a transporter action to move the cargo between ships. So let's talk about how you can use the transport action. If you want to move cargo or crew between friendly ships, if they're in the same space, you just say I'm taking a transport action, and you can move your cargo or crew from the one ship to another ship in the same space. And you just do that, take your action, and put your action marker down. You've taken your one action for your turn, but there's no other test or anything to be done. Then you would just transfer, if you wanted to transfer this Tribbles from the Reliant to the Equinox, you could take a transport action, and then they have the Tribbles. Of course, you probably want to transfer that to an enemy ship, not to a friendly ship. And when you're transferring cargo or crew between friendly ships, for one transport action, you can transfer any number of cargo or crew to the other friendly ship. Now, if you want to transport cargo or crew to an enemy ship, like if you wanted to transport these Tribbles onto an enemy ship, it's not quite as easy. You have to make a sensor test against the enemy's shields. So again, you'd say I'm taking transport action, then you would look at what your sensor level is, in this case 7, against the enemy's shields, which in this case is 12. Of course, then you would be able to play one card if you had one that would increase your sensors, and then of course you get to roll one die. So 7, 8, 9, 10. So hopefully I would have at least had a card or something that let me add one to my sensors, but if not, I fail and I just wouldn't get to transport it. If you do equal or exceed the enemy shield value, then you can transfer one cargo or one crew to that ship. Well, you could transfer one cargo to that ship. You wouldn't want to transfer one of your crew to that ship. But also, instead of transferring cargo to the ship, if you do a transport action against an enemy ship and you succeed in the roll of your sensors against their shields, you can take one crew from that enemy ship. Now, we haven't talked about how crew are assigned to ships, but we will here in a little bit. But if you do a transport against an enemy ship, instead of transferring a cargo to them, one of the things you can do is take a crew from them, take one of their crew and put it under your ship as a prisoner. Or if they had a cargo, you could take that. If it was a cargo you wanted, you could take that and put it on your ship as a cargo. Or you can just force your opponent to discard one of his crew, or so he can either discard a crew from his ship or discard a crew from his hand. Or the other thing is, if he had taken previously one of your crew as a prisoner, then you could use a transport action to retrieve that prisoner back and transport it back to your ship. And if you do retrieve a crew card from an enemy ship, you can immediately assign it to your ship as a crew, or you can just discard it. And since I keep talking about crew cards while I'm talking about transport action here, we might as well talk about a little bit about crew. So in your command deck, some of the cards you draw into your hand you know, they may say ops, but they may say crew here. So anytime on your turn, you can assign a crew to one of your ships. So say if I wanted to assign Admiral Cartwright here to the Equinox as a crew, you just put it under there, under that ship card, and then he's a crew there, and he gives this bonus. So he's a captain, he adds +2 to weapons for each uncloaked enemy ship in this or in any one adjacent location. So that's a power you'll have as long as that person is a crew on your ship. Now, you can assign one of each type of crew. There's 4 types. You got captains, engineers, specialists, and officers. So you can have one of each crew type on each ship. If you ever have another captain card or officer card or any crew card that's already of a type that you already have on a ship and you want to replace it, you can do that. You just assign the new, say I had a different captain I wanted to assign to the Equinox, I could just assign the new captain to the Equinox and discard this old one to my command deck discard deck. But again, the crew provides usually an ongoing bonus of some sort. Now, if you ever, some cards like this one, you know, has a crew and an ops effect. Some have a crew or an ops or a combat. If when a card is a crew on a ship, if you ever decide to use that card for its opt power or its combat power, then you have to discard that card and no longer use it. It's no longer a crew card. So you can always keep it on your ship as a crew as long as you're using its crew value, but if you ever decide to use one of the other powers, the ops or combat powers on a card, then you have to discard that crew card after you use it. All right, another type of action that you might can take is a system test. So say for instance you had a mission like this one that says make a successful level 15 sensor test against any enemy ship. Well, you would have to take one of your ship's actions to attempt that level 15 sensor test. So that would be the action that ship could take for the turn. So again, another action you can take is doing a system test, and you would do that again, for example, if you were trying to complete this mission. Alright, another type of action you can take is a cloaking action if your ship is capable of cloaking. There's, you know, several of the Klingon ships are capable of cloaking, only very few of the Federation ships are. You can tell if your ship is capable of cloaking if it has one of these blue. So in the standard alert status, it has cloaking action here. That's the blue line. In the yellow alert, it has one, it can cloak in the yellow alert section here and in the red alert here. So if you have one of these blue sections, and again, you would see that on your dial. So let me just turn this one so you'll see that. So if he cloaked this ship, you would see all of his systems are pretty much not usable except for engines, and then they're set to 9. But when this ship is cloaked, it couldn't use its weapons or its sensors or its shield. It can pretty much just move. But let's talk about how you take a cloaking action. So if the Klingon player was going to take a cloak action with this ship, the Bortos, well, first thing you do is move the dial into the blue cloaked section for its current level, like so. Then you would find 2 matching cloak tokens, in this case like cloak 1, cloak 1. There's also like cloak 2, cloak 2, cloak 3, cloak. Anyway, you'd put one face down, not showing the number. You'd remove that model from the board, place this cloak token face down on the board and place the matching Cloak 1 on the card for that board, so you know that Cloak 1 is indeed Cloak 1 on the tiles. So as I mentioned, when a ship is cloaked, most of its, well, that's not the cloaked one. Most of its systems are disabled except for its engines. So a cloaked ship can move with whatever the engine value is shown. Again, for this one, it's a 9. So it can move, but it can't take any other actions except for cloaking actions, and we'll tell you what the other possible cloaking actions are in a second. But again, it can move, but it can't take most other actions. If it's in the same space of another ship, it doesn't have to make breakaway rolls or evasion rolls if it moves through, so it's pretty much invisible to other ships. It can't be attacked by other ships. It doesn't explore new locations when it moves onto an unexplored tile, though it does have to stop. If it enters an unexplored tile, it does have to stop. Now on its next turn, it could move again to another unexplored tile, but it can't move, through tiles. It can't move through unexplored tiles like it can through explored tiles, again up to the engine value of the ship that's actually cloaked. The only action that an enemy ship can take against a cloaked ship is a scan action trying to reveal that cloak token, trying to reveal that ship. So we mentioned that a cloaked ship can move, and pretty much the only other action it can take is a cloaking action, and a cloaked ship can take a cloaking action to create a sensor echo. So if a cloaked ship takes an action to create a sensor echo, they will grab one of these cloak echo tokens, and they'll have one that's the echo, and they'll pick up the one that's their real ship, their real cloaked ship, and they'll mix them up and then put them back on the board, so the opponent does not know which one is the sensor echo and which one is the real cloaked ship. Now, you can look at your own tokens at any time to know which one is your ship and which one's the sensor echo. And sensor echo tokens can move just like any other ship. They can move independently of the other cloak tokens, and they can move up to the engine level of any of your ships that you have on the map that are currently cloaked. So it doesn't have to move at the engine level of the ship that created it with a cloaking action. If you have another cloaked ship on the board with a higher engine level, it could move on the map just like that one. Again, though, if you move a echo onto an unexplored location, it has to stop. And of course, sensor echoes can't take any actions. They can't take a cloaking action to create another sensor echo, because they're really not there. They're just a false echo that was created by the real cloaked ship. And sensor echoes will remain on the map even if the ship that created that sensor echo decloaks. The sensor echo will remain on the map, and it can still move at the speed of up to the highest level of any other cloaked ship on the board. If there are no other cloaked ships on the board, a sensor echo can only move with a speed of 1, so it can just basically move to adjacent map tiles. But it will still be there. The only way to get rid of a sensor echo is to do a scan action, and let's talk about that. If a ship is trying to scan a cloak token to determine if it's a Echo or a real ship, a ship can take a scan action on a cloak token in its space. Well, you know, an opposing ship. So to attempt to reveal a cloak token, you have to take a scan action and perform a level 15 sensor test. So again, you'd have to use your whatever your sensor's set to, plus you could play an ops card if that increased your sensors and roll one die. And if you're equal 15 or greater, then you reveal the cloak token. If the cloak token is an echo, then you just remove it from the board. If the cloak token's revealed and it's a real ship, then that ship would then immediately decloak in your space, and then you actually would have the opportunity to take another action immediately, but of course it would cost another one of your action tokens. So if you spent one of your action tokens to scan and you reveal a ship, even though normally each ship can only take one action, if you revealed a cloak token and it's a real ship, then you could spend one of your other action tokens to maybe make an attack or something. But again, that does take another action token, leaving only one other action token for another ship. So if your third action for the turn was scanning that cloak token and revealing it, and you don't have any other actions you can take that turn, then you couldn't take another action. And I didn't mention this, but if a ship is cloaked and they want to voluntarily decloak, they can just take their one power adjustment for that turn and adjust out of well, that's the wrong ship. They can take their power adjustment for that turn and adjust out of the cloaked state back into one of the normal settings at their current alert level, and then they immediately decloak. So that doesn't really cost an action to decloak. So you can decloak out of, you can use a power adjustment to decloak out of cloaking, but it actually takes an action. You have to spend an action to cloak. You can't use a power adjustment to just cloak. Alright, another type of action you can take is a combat action. So if two ships are in the same location, two opposing ships, on your turn you can take a combat action to attack an enemy ship. So in this instance we'll say it's the Federation player's turn, and for the Reliance action he's going to attack this Klingon ship. So the attacker is called the aggressor, and of course the ship being attacked, that is the target. So if the attacker has not already made a power adjustment on their ship, they could do that first. You know, they declare for their action they're making an attack. They could make a power adjustment, again, if they haven't made one previously, because each ship can only make one power adjustment. Then the aggressor could play a combat card. So maybe a combat card is where it says combat on the card, and then it'll have some combat effect here. For instance, this one says if this card is the first card played during a combat, no other combat cards may be played during this combat. So normally the aggressor gets to play a combat card, then the target player gets to play a combat card. The aggressor has the choice to play a combat card if he chooses to or not to. Either way, the target gets to play a combat card. If the aggressor at first chose not to play a combat card, but then the target did play a combat card, then the aggressor has one more opportunity to play a combat card. However, if the aggressor played this card first as his combat card, then as you can see, the target wouldn't even have the opportunity to play a combat card. So then the attacker will roll one die, and the target will get to roll 1 die, and the attacker is using his weapons, so he's comparing his weapons level at whatever setting he's at, plus his combat card or any other crew or token effects that may increase his weapon level, plus his die roll against the target's shield level, plus the target gets to roll a die. And of course, if the target had any crew cards or bonus tokens on their ship that increase their shield levels, those would be taken into effect also. In any case, after all that is done, if the attacker's, the aggressor's weapon level is higher than, it can't be equal to, it's got to be greater than the target's shield level, then they do damage to the target. So if the aggressor's weapon total is greater than the target shield level, they do 1 damage. So the target would then have to go down to the next, put their dial down to the next setting. So again, if he took 1 damage, he's in the standard white settings. He would have to rotate his dial down into one of the yellow alert settings. If he was already in the yellow alert settings and he took a damage, he would have to go down into the red alert settings. If he was already in the red alert settings and he took a damage, then he would be destroyed. If it happens that in that combat the weapons value of the aggressor was 2 times the amount of the shield value of the target, then he would do 2 damage instead of just 1. And if the aggressor's weapon value ended up being 3 times the target shield value, then he would do 3 damage, which would pretty much destroy the ship he was attacking, even if it had been at full health prior. If you happen to have 2 ships in a location with an enemy ship, you can do a combined attack, although both ships will have to spend an action to make the attack if they're both going to attack. And in that case, both ships add their weapon value, which is of course the top number there. So both ships would add their weapon value. Of course, then you get to play 1 combat card, and any bonuses that those ships have from crew or tokens on those ships would count also. But you would only roll 1 dice. Each ship wouldn't get to roll a dice. So you count the weapon value of both ships, any bonuses from tokens or crew from both ships, but you only roll 1 die. And then again, if there were 2 enemy ships in there, you would have to pick one as the target. You wouldn't target both of them. But again, if you do that combined attack, you have to spend an action for each ship that's participating in the attack. So I think that covers all the possible actions: cloaking action, combat action, influence actions. Oh, reinforcement action. If your fleet size ever drops below, your fleet point total, like it starts out with 10 in a 10-point game. So if you ever lose a ship, due to combat or what have you, and your fleet sizes drop below the fleet points allowed for that game, you can take a reinforcement action. Now, one thing to mention is the first time you lose a ship, your fleet size is increased by 1. So if you lose a ship due to any reason, combat or some encounter, your fleet size will increase by 1. So if you're playing a 10-point game, after you've lost a ship, your fleet size increases from 10 to 11. So you'll remember all the ships that you didn't get chosen at the beginning of the game. They formed your reinforcement pool. So if you lose a ship for you can take an action as a reinforcement action to look through your fleet ship cards in your reinforcement pool and choose one that will bring your ship total, your fleet size, back up to the maximum, which after you lose your first ship would be 11. You get to choose one, you don't have to draft it, and then you find that ship and put it on your command post. And of course that would have been that ship's action for that turn. Alright, I think that's the only action I hadn't covered. Other than that, we talked about the repair action, scan action, transport action, and system test actions. So, those are all the possible actions. So remember, you can take 3 actions, and each one has to be taken with a different ship normally. The other things you can do on your turn is discard one command card to his discard pile and draw a new one. I don't think I mentioned this, but anytime you play a command card for any reason, playing one as a crew, playing one in combat, playing one for its ops effect, when you play a combat card, you always immediately draw a new one into your hand. So you'll always have 4 command cards in your hand. Whenever you play a command card, you draw a new one. One more thing about command cards, I said during combat you could use a combat effect. So you can never use an ops effect in combat. You can only use combat effect in combat. Though if you have a combat effect that adds to your weapons or shields, you can play that card even outside of combat if you're doing a test that is related to weapons or shields. But again, ops effects cannot be used in combat, only combat effects. Okay, another thing you can do on your turn is cycle a mission card. So if you have a mission card in your display that you just don't think you're going to be able to complete, you can discard that mission card and draw a new one from your mission deck. If your mission deck ever runs out, instead of drawing from your mission, you don't shuffle your discarded mission cards. If your mission deck ever runs out, you just draw one from over here where the mission cards are next to the mission deck console, and you can choose whether you want to draw a science or influence or combat mission. So I think that covers everything you can do on your turn. So again, on your turn you can move each, and you can do these things in any order. You don't have to do them in a certain, like you can move one ship, then move another ship, then attack with a ship you'd previously moved. You couldn't move it again, but if you had moved it to someplace there was an enemy. So again, you can do these things in any order. You can move each of your ships in your fleet. You can make one power adjustment with each ship in your fleet. You can take up to 3 actions, but each ship can normally only take 1 action. You can play command cards and cycle a mission card, which we talked about, and you can discard 1 command card from your hand to draw a new one. So you can do all those things on your turn. Once you've finished your turn, then it's your opponent's turn, and they can do all those same things. You keep playing until one person has got 10, if you're playing the standard game, 10 victory points. This is your victory point pile over here. So like if you completed this mission, destroy 1 enemy ship in combat, you would just add this card to your victory point pile, and that would count for 1 victory point. Then you would draw a new mission card and place it there. So once you get 10 victory points, either from missions or, again, remember I mentioned if you destroy another ship, that's a victory point. Some encounter cards will give you a victory point if you complete them. And if you complete a victory point that's encounter card that's worth a victory point, you would just put it in your victory pile. Anyway, as soon as if the first player gets 10 victory points first, then the opposing player gets one more turn to try to get equal or more victory points. If they do, then they end up winning, but if not, the first player would win. If the second player got to 10 victory points first, then the first player does not get an additional turn to try to get 10 or more victory points. So that's it. Whoever gets 10 victory points first, normally, wins the game. So that's a lot. This video's been long. Let me just do a couple of example turns real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. Alright, so we'll say, I think I've got the board set back up how it was at the beginning. So we'll say it's the Federation player's turn. So he decides he's going to move the Reliant. So the Reliant is here. Tiles adjacent to the command post are these first three, so he can move into any of these first three tiles. So we'll just say the Reliant, he's not going to scan first, he's just going to go crazy and move in there. Now, his engines are set to, what is that, 8? 6. His engines are set to 6. Anyway, he enters here. He's got to roll for an encounter on a 1 or 2. He'll have an encounter. He got a 3, so he doesn't have to have an encounter. Now, the size of this tile is 6, so because his engines are 6, he can't move into another one because it would cost him 6 just to cross it, but it would cost him 1 to move into another. So unless his engines were at least 7, he couldn't move into one of these other spaces. But what he can do now, he's going to go ahead and stop moving there, but for his action, so he's going to take an action, place it on his card. He's going to exert influence, and he's going to put a control token on this location. Alright, now the Equinox is going to move. His engine setting is just to 1, so he can only move 1. He's going to go ahead and move in here without scanning. Oh, by the way, this anyone in this nebula gets +4 to their shields. But alright, let's see what we got here. Stable wormhole. Any ship may move from this location to another stable wormhole location as if it was an adjacent tile. So if we find another one, they would get to move from one to the other. But he does have to roll, and on to 1 to 4 he'll have an encounter. So let's see what he gets. Oh, 5, so he doesn't have to have an encounter. Now this one is only size 3, but his engines are only at 1, so that's all he can move. But he will take an action also, so he's going to spend a second action for this turn, and he is also going to put control to an influence action and also put a control token. Now the reason we're trying to do that is because one of our missions is control 8 adjacent locations. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and move the Sutherland, and we'll just say he's going to come here and move into this spot. Now his engines are currently set to 5. So he moves in here. Habitable planet. Installations at this location require 2 additional control tokens to build, so that one's kind of hard to build on. But he does have to roll for an encounter. On a 1 to 2 he gets encounter. Got a 3, so he doesn't have to have one. Now this one's only size 2. His engines are at 5, so he can actually move again, so he's going to do that because it only costs 2 to cross that. So now he's going to move into here. Now he's going to have to roll for another encounter. On a 1 to 2 he'll have one. Got a 6, so he doesn't have to have one, but now he can't, it would cost 8 to cross this one, so he wouldn't be able to do that because his engine size is only 5. So now he's going to take the last action available for this turn, and he is going to put a control token also here on this location. Now, there's no more actions available, so the Jaeger here won't be able to take an action, but it can still move. So the Jaeger has its engine set to 9, so it only costs 2 to move across here, so we'll say he's going to, and because this is explored already, he doesn't have to roll for an encounter. Then he's going to move into here. Habitable planet installations at this location require 3. Man. Anyway, but he has to roll for an encounter, 1 or 2. 2. Oh, so he has to draw an encounter card. Alright, so he gets this one. Derelict warship. You encounter an ancient warship. The study of this ship's weaponry helps improve your own starship weapons. Place a +1 permanent +1 weapons token on one of your ships in this location. Well, the Jaeger's in that location, so he'll take this +1 weapons token and put it on his card. And then this encounter card, it's not worth any victory points or anything, so it's just discarded. But I said the Jaeger's engines are set to 9, so he's only used 2 to cross there, 6 to cross there, so that's 8. So he can actually move 1 more. So he's going to move into here. And now he won't be able to move any further because that's another size 5. But he does have to roll for an encounter, 1 to 4, 6, so he doesn't have to have another encounter. Now he can't take an action, but I can still discard a command card and draw a new one. I don't really like this Beverly Crusher one, so I'm going to discard that command card and draw a new one into my hand. And I think that's pretty much all I can do or want to do on my turn. So now I'm done, and now it goes to the Klingons. Now, one thing I don't think I mentioned so far in these rules that I should have, when you explore a tile, when you move on to an unexplored location and explore it, you point it, the text towards you. That way you know which locations you've explored in case you get some mission or something that says you've explored, 8 locations or whatever. You'll know which ones you're explored because they point toward you. So if the Klingon player explores locations, he would point the text toward him. For instance, the Klingon player has this one where your ships have explored 3 adjacent locations worth 1 victory point. We ought to be able to get that one right here. So just to show something different, we'll say the Kondak here, he's going to take a scan action, so he'll take his action token, put it on here, and then he's going to scan and look at this tile. And he sees it's empty space, nothing too much, so now he's going to put a scan token on there to show that he scanned it. Now if anybody actually explores that location, you just discard that scan token. But now he doesn't have to move or anything. He took an action, but he can move later. So we'll have the Kronos 1 is going to move here. And he explored a uninhabitable planet. Any ship that ends its turn in this location with shields of 3 or less takes 1 damage. Well, first of all, he's not going to end his turn in that location because his engines are at 8 and it only costs 4 to cross that. But his shields are at 6 anyway, so he wouldn't have to take 1 damage. But he's going to go ahead and move again because his engines are at 8 and it only costs 4 to cross here. So he's going to move here into this pulsar. Now, oh, I forgot he had to roll for that encounter before I even do that. Okay, he got a 4, not a 1. So now he moved here. Now he's got to roll for the encounter 1 or 2. He doesn't have to get 1. And here it says anytime a ship is required to, in this location is required to use its sensors, roll a die. On a roll of 1 to 3, it receives -2 to sensors. On a roll of 4 to 6, it receives +2 to sensors. Anyway, he's going to stop there. And because he only had 8, and it cost 4 to cross there, he would need another 6 to cross this one. But he's going to take we'll say he's going to take a cloaking action. So he'll move his dial into the cloaking section, like so, and we'll see that puts his engines at 9. Now he has to put cloak. He'll use the cloak 1 token and put it there where he was, and the other one over here on his ship map, and he'll just put his model here next to his ship so that he knows he's cloaked there. And that was a cloaking action, so he's got to put a token there, leaving only 1 action left. Alright, now he's going to move the Bortos here, and he'll just move here. And in this location you get -2 to your weapons, but he's got to roll for an encounter. A 1, so he's got to have an encounter, because on a 1 to 2 you have an encounter. So he got Ferengi Traders. A Ferengi merchant offers you the deal of a lifetime. Roll 1d6. On a result of 3 to 6, you receive a permanent +2 system token for any system of your choice. On a roll of 1 to 2, you must trash your entire hand of combat cards and then discard this card. Alright, let's roll our d6. We got a 6. So we get to receive a permanent +2 system token for any system of our choice. I'll take a +2 to weapons token, and again that goes on the Bortos. His engines are at 6. It costs 5 to cross this, so he could move 1 more. So let's say he's going to go ahead and do that. So he's going to move into here. Now he can't move any further because this is a size 7. He does have to roll for an encounter. Oh, 2, so he does, on a 1 or 2, he does have to get an encounter. Ferengi Explorers. Attack your starship without warning. Roll 1d6 to determine how effective their weapons are. On a result of 2 to 6, a friendly ship of your choice in this location is the target of an attack with a weapons test of 15. On a roll of 1, the weapons test total is 30. Resolve the attack like a normal combat. Discard this card after the attack. Alright, we'll roll and hope we don't get a 1. We didn't, we get a 3. So it's like somebody's making an attack against my ship with a weapons total of 15. Now I haven't made a power adjustment, so I could make a power adjustment to my shields. I haven't done one yet this turn with this ship. But my shields are at 12, which is the highest that they can be. Now I can play a command card if I have one that affects my shield. So let me take a look. Since this is like a normal attack, I can play a combat card, so I have this one that gives me +2 to any system. So I'll give that +2 to my shields. Now this just gets discarded, so I'll put this in my discard pile, and I get to immediately draw a new card. Of course I can't use it right now. So now my shields are at 14, so I just have to roll a 1, which, I mean, I can't roll worse than that, so I didn't even really have to roll. So they don't do any damage to me. And now we just discard this card. And now he hasn't taken an action, so we'll say the Bortos is going to take an action to put a control, do an influence action and put a control token here. Alright, so that's his 3 actions. Now we have explored. Remember we had this, your ships have to have explored 3 adjacent locations. Well, I've explored more than 3 adjacent locations, so I complete this mission. So it goes in my victory pile, so I have 1 victory point, and I can draw a new mission. I have this other mission. Your ships have explored 4 locations that contain stars, but I've only explored 1, 2 star locations. These other 2 are not stars, so I don't complete that. But I'd say that's probably going to wrap it up for his turn, so now I would go back to the Federation And I think I'm going to wrap it up because this video is super long already. I think you can see from my rules explanation and see from the couple of example turns I've done how this game plays. Anyway, of course I haven't played it in 10 years. Well, I played it yesterday solo by myself, but I am playing it in a couple of weeks against a friend of mine. I like this game. I don't know why I haven't played it in 10 years. It is, the rule book is completely disorganized, and so after having not played it in 10 years and having to go back and read through that thing and try to grok all these rules, it was not an easy task, but I think I got most of them. I'm sure if I mess something up, somebody will point that out to me in the video. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.